It was a new kind of warfare, a style of combat that the British Army, the most powerful military force on Earth, had never encountered. Across the forests and hills of colonial America, British officers began to die, not in glorious cavalry charges, not leading their men in disciplined volleys, but suddenly, unexpectedly, from distances they thought were safe. A flash from the tree line 200 yards away, a crack of rifle fire, and another officer dropped dead before he even heard the shot. The British called it murder. They called it dishonorable, uncivilized, against the rules of war. But the Americans? They called it winning. Welcome to the deadly world of American Revolutionary War snipers, the invisible terror that decapitated British command and changed warfare forever. This is the story of how American marksmen made British officers realize, on this battlefield, there was no place to hide. To understand why this was so devastating, we need to understand 18th century warfare. In Europe, war was a gentleman's affair, or at least it pretended to be. Armies lined up in neat formations. Officers wore bright, distinctive uniforms to show their rank and coordinate their men. And crucially, there was an unspoken rule. You didn't deliberately target officers. It simply wasn't done. Officers were gentlemen, after all. British officers stood out intentionally. Gold epaulettes, ornate gorgets around their necks, sashes, powdered wigs. They needed to be visible so their troops could see them through the black powder smoke of massed musket volleys. On European battlefields, this worked perfectly. But in America, that gleaming gold braid became a death sentence. The Americans weren't playing by European rules. Many colonial fighters, particularly those from the frontier, had grown up with a rifle in their hands. They hunted for survival. They'd fought in brutal conflicts with Native American tribes where there were no rules, no formations, only survival. They knew how to track, how to hide, how to wait, and most importantly, how to shoot. And they had a weapon the British didn't, the Pennsylvania long rifle. Let's talk about the technology gap. The standard British infantry weapon was the Brown Bess musket. It was reliable, quick to reload, and devastating in massed volleys. But accurate? Maybe to 50 or 75 yards if you were lucky. British tactics didn't require precision. They required volume of fire. The American long rifle was a different beast entirely. With a rifle barrel, those spiral grooves that spun the bullet, it could accurately kill a man at 200 to 300 yards. In the hands of an experienced marksman, even further. A skilled rifleman could hit a target the size of a man's head from distances where British officers thought they were completely safe. Imagine the psychological terror. You're a British captain, surveying the battlefield from what you believe is a secure position. Suddenly, the man next to you drops, blood spreading across his scarlet coat. No warning, no nearby enemy, just death from an invisible hand. The most famous example? The death of British General Simon Fraser at the Battle of Saratoga in 1777. Fraser was a brilliant, charismatic officer, exactly the kind of leader the British desperately needed. During the battle, he rallied his troops, riding conspicuously on horseback, his distinctive uniform marking him as a high-ranking officer. American General Benedict Arnold, yes, that Benedict Arnold, before he turned traitor, reportedly pointed to Fraser and said to one of his riflemen, possibly Timothy Murphy, "That officer is of great importance. Kill him." Murphy climbed a tree for a better vantage point, took careful aim from approximately 300 yards away, and fired. Fraser fell, mortally wounded. Without their key commander, British morale collapsed. The battle turned. Many historians argue that Fraser's death contributed directly to the British surrender at Saratoga, the turning point of the entire war. One bullet, one dead officer, one changed battle. This was the nightmare the British faced. But this wasn't isolated. All across the colonies, American riflemen made it their mission to kill British officers first. At Lexington and Concord, officers were primary targets. At Bunker Hill, the famous order "Don't fire until you see the whites of their eyes" had a second, unspoken part. Then shoot the officers. The strategy was brutally effective. British junior officers began to refuse promotions, who wanted the gold braid that marked them for death. Some officers tried to disguise themselves, wearing enlisted men's coats. But the Americans were smart. They learned to identify officers by behavior, who gave orders, who carried maps, who rode horses. British commanders were furious. They wrote letters home calling American tactics barbarous and savage. General John Burgoyne complained bitterly about the rebels' cowardly practice of shooting from trees. British military doctrine had no answer for an enemy that wouldn't stand and fight properly. The British tried countermeasures. They deployed their own light infantry and Jaeger troops, German mercenaries skilled in irregular warfare. They tried to protect officers by keeping them back from the front lines. But in the dense American forests, there was no safe back line. An American rifleman could be 200 yards away, invisible in the undergrowth, and your commanding officer could be dead before anyone even knew where the shot came from. The psychological impact was devastating. British soldiers began to fear the forest themselves. Every tree could hide death. Every ridge could conceal a marksman. Officers became hesitant, cautious, unable to lead from the front as their training demanded. When your leaders are being systematically picked off, morale doesn't just decline, it collapses. And here's what made it even worse. American riflemen were often deployed as skirmishers ahead of the main force. They'd harass British columns, pick off officers and sergeants, then melt away before the British could organize a response. By the time the actual battle began, British units were already leaderless, disorganized, and demoralized. Some American rifle units became legendary. Daniel Morgan's Provisional Rifle Corps was the British nightmare personified. These frontier marksmen wore distinctive hunting shirts, carried their long rifles, and specialized in precision killing. At the Battle of Cowpens in 1781, Morgan's riflemen systematically targeted British officers and sergeants, throwing the entire British formation into chaos before the main American force even engaged. The British learned to recognize the hunting shirts and would focus fire on them, but by then, the damage was done. What the Americans pioneered at a tactical level would eventually transform warfare forever. The deliberate targeting of enemy leadership, the use of precision marksmanship, the value of cover and concealment, the effectiveness of irregular forces, these weren't just rebellious tactics. They were the blueprint for modern warfare. Today's military snipers, special operations forces, and asymmetric warfare tactics all trace their lineage back to those American riflemen in the forests of colonial America. The British called it dishonorable. History calls it revolutionary. "No place to hide" wasn't just a slogan. It was the lived reality for British officers fighting in the American Revolution. The Americans rewrote the rules of engagement, turning the battlefield into a deadly hunting ground where rank meant nothing, and that bright red coat with gold braid. British officers discovered that their training, their traditions, their entire understanding of honorable warfare meant nothing against an enemy that fought to win rather than to look glorious dying. American snipers didn't just kill British officers, they killed the British Army's confidence, cohesion, and will to fight, one shot at a time, from positions the British never saw, leaving nowhere to hide and no way to win. That was the American way of war, and it changed everything. Thanks for watching, and be sure to subscribe for more hidden stories from history.